The NFL Combine is over. Guess what? The Giants and the Jets, two teams in New York, neither one of them still have a quarterback, and we don't know where they're going to get one unless it's Aaron Rodgers. We'll talk about that and more here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I couldn't have said it any better because it is your team every day here on Locked On NFL. We thank you for making us your first listen. We are the second of two NFL shows here on Locked On NFL, and you can get it wherever you listen to or watch your podcast. Make sure you tap in each and every day so you do not miss an episode of the show. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us here every single day, and shout out to my man Julian for being here every single Monday, the host of Locked On Panthers. And I'm going to tell you what we're going to go through, and it's got Julian's name written all over it. This is a roadmap to Julian because we're going to end the show asking this question. Who really won the Bears in the Panthers trade from a couple of years ago? Yeah, y'all, all that right nowism. And now 2 years later, it don't look like there's that big of a gap between those two teams, and we'll hit that. Washington and the 49ers appear to be going in different directions. It may affect the standings, but right now it's about the direction. We'll talk about that. And the fun starts at the top because the Jets and the Giants, even though they are in the same city, they're usually in different spaces. Oh, not right now, because guess what? They don't have a quarterback, and there's thought that a former Jets quarterback will eventually be a Giants quarterback, and to sort all of this mess out, I've got my man Julian Council. Julian Council, we're going to start the show talking about Aaron Rodgers and the Jets all in one segment. You ready to get it, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. There's talk that from the combine, as my girl Patricia Traina from Locked On Giants is going to tell you, the rumor circuit hit in high gear. The Giants are picking third, and they're talking about even if they draft a quarterback, they're going to get a veteran. I don't even know if the word tutor can come up because I don't think the dude that they're talking about is much of a tutorer. Let's listen to this.
All right, Aaron Rodgers. First reaction I had when I heard that Rodgers is not his camp. I don't want to say it was his camp, but I believe that it might be, somebody who is friendly with him. I don't know if it was his agent or whatnot, but, just keep in mind something, folks. Rodgers, as far as I know, was not given permission by the Jets to contact other teams officially. So any reports you might have heard about there being an offer on the table for Rodgers are not true. There can't be any offers on the table. Otherwise, the Giants get nailed for tampering. That being said, yes, it is true that these agents sit in the back rooms with GMs, and they might be discussing one client, but hey, maybe they represent another guy who's just still under contract, and there's an interest gauged, if you will. It goes on all the time at the combine. So it does not surprise me that Rodgers, there might have been an inquiry made by the Rodgers camp to the Giants. Now, what my understanding is of that situation, the Giants right now, they are exploring all options. But that being said, they have kind of stacked the options now that Matthew Stafford, which was their top option, by the way, Matthew Stafford obviously out of the picture. So the Giants have kind of stacked the options, if you will. And Aaron Rodgers, as I understand it, is not exactly high up on the list of options.
All right, those last words you said is that he's not high on their list of options. I would think if Julian Council was making the decisions, that would be correct.
Yeah, I don't see why any team would be that interested in Aaron Rodgers outside of the fact, yes, he's going to be likely a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm not trying to sit here and say that Aaron Rodgers has not been one of the all-time greatest quarterbacks, maybe the most talented player to ever play the position. But the Aaron Rodgers that we now have here in March of 2025 is not the Aaron Rodgers that we saw Heck, I mean, 5 years ago in Green Bay, you look at the end of his tenure there at the Packers, that game on Sunday Night Football against the Lions, like where was the fight from Rodgers? Then he tears his Achilles 4 plays into the season a couple years ago. This past year was another disaster for the Jets. It just, I don't see why. I mean, I guess the Giants would want to do this because Dable and Shane are fighting for their jobs. And John Mara came out there and said that he was going to be patient. He was going to see things through. And by seeing it through, it's not going out there and drafting a rookie quarterback, whether that could be Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, whoever they may think makes sense for them in this upcoming draft. They would need to get a veteran. And Rodgers already up in New York, could take the pressure. I've seen Sam Darnold's name thrown out there. I don't know why Darnold would want to go back into that pressure cooker of New York. That's not the kind of guy I think that can have success in that environment. I think the Jets mainly let him down, but still, I don't find him as the guy who would want to go back to New York to be back in all that media spotlight. So the Rodgers situation, it's interesting to me, but also kind of baffling when you just look at it just from this view where why is that why would it even be a top option? Like, good. As far as Patricia said, that he's not one of their top options, because I don't know why he would be.
Right. And when I think about it, man, I'll take Jameis Winston and his play well for 2 games and then turn back into Jameis Winston at game 3. I take that over. I take Aaron Rodgers at this point. But I do understand that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll may have to have something happen that saves their job, and they'll probably be dependent on a Hall of Famer more than they'll be dependent on somebody else at this point. But the Jets are sitting right there as a case study as why this could be a mistake on the field as well as financially. Now, I don't know if there's any offset language in his contract. I doubt that very seriously. And Rodgers may be on that. Look, I got enough money. I'll play for next to nothing, even though I doubt that very seriously. I want you to listen to the mess that the Jets are still in with their Aaron Rodgers decision that still actually has to be made. Check this out from John Butchko.
When did the Jets need to make the call on the June 1st designation? Can they leave it until after the first wave of free agency and figure out what their cap looks like? So this question actually pertains to something Darren Muji said on Tuesday when he addressed the media. Jets have 2 options with Aaron Rodgers when they cut him. They can either make him a regular cut, in which case Rodgers will count $49 million against the salary cap this year, or they can designate him as what's known as a post-June 1st cut. And if the Jets designate Rodgers a post-June 1st cut, it becomes more complex. Rodgers would maintain his current $23.5 million cap hit until June 1st. And on June 1st, that cap hit goes down to $14 million. So the Jets would actually gain $9.5 million in cap space on June 1st. The catch is that Rodgers would then count $34 million against the salary cap in 2026. Whereas the Jets just make Rodgers a regular cut. He counts for $49 million this year, and then the Jets are done in 2026. Darren Muji indicated that the Jets are likely to make Rodgers a post-June 1st cut, which means, again, $23.5 million until June 1st, drops to 14 on June 1st, $34 million in 2026 if the Jets do that. And the question is there a deadline to make the decision? And the answer to that is no.
Those numbers, some of them are popcorn numbers. It doesn't really matter. He's already gotten that money. But it's still, man, when you have salary cap issues approaching $50 million in a new regime, when your team has a lot of holes, that hinders you for the next 2 years. And this is probably reason number 1 for the Giants or anybody else to just totally back off of this situation, because the Jets are a case study on why things failed with Aaron Rodgers.
Well, I would think, too, that the other team I know these are a bunch of void years. He's still under contract for the upcoming season. So the other team, I think, acquiring him, whether he's cut, I don't think he'd be traded. They wouldn't have to take on that level of a contract. They could be a lot smarter. And Lord knows Joe Shane would have to be way smarter than he's been when dealing with these quarterback contracts. He wants to keep his job past 2025. If the Giants do, in fact, go out there and bring in Aaron Rodgers. Like, and for the Jets, I'm looking at over the cap right now. They're projected to have $23.5 million currently. And like, that's not a lot of money to spend, because you got to need like $8 or $9 million for your draft class. And then you want to have money to be able to utilize in season. So we're really talking about 10,
Maybe
$11 million.
10, 11, right.
Now we're not talking about a lot of money for a team that still has a lot of issues to figure out. and quarterback is one of them. So what did they get out of this? They got, was it 6 wins? Is that what they got out of Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, Lazard was a terrible signing. Randall Cobb did nothing for them. They brought in Devontae Adams, and they're going to likely get rid of him this offseason as well. They had to deal with Nathaniel Hackett as their OC, which is ridiculous when he had one of the most embarrassing stints as a head coach in the history of the NFL. Like, these dudes are fighting on a sideline, and he's pretending like nothing's happening.
Right.
It's just week 1, we knew he had no idea what he was doing with the field goal situation there against Seattle. It's just like, my God, man. And that's the guy that Aaron Rodgers said, I love him. He's one of my favorite coaches. I want to be the play caller. They did all this, moved all these mountains, and it cost Robert Saleh his job, cost Joe Douglas's job, and cost Woody Johnson his sanity.
Yeah, I would say it would cost Woody Johnson's reputation, but I think that is all that ship has been sailed when it comes to reputation. But
as
two teams in New York, the mecca of the media, and there's not one quarterback to be found, and I don't know how they're going to get one. There's one in San Francisco, but the question is who is he going to throw the ball to? With all of those guys being on the market, one already being traded in Debo Samuel. We'll discuss the 49ers and the Commanders in the direction that both of those teams are going, and we'll do it in just a second here on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel, and when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no place better to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to be on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment in the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. That's right away. No reason to be waiting. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving along here on Locked On NFL on this glorious day with my man Julian Council, host of the Locked On Panthers podcast. Julian, the 49ers, we've talked about them before. They got to re-sign Brock Purdy. Washington is sitting there at the end of the first round. So much talk about maybe they make a move for Myles Garrett. They made a move for a veteran receiver who has had a lot of success against the Philadelphia Eagles. Here's my man David Harrison, our Wednesday host, talking about the Commanders and their new acquisition.
Despite everybody's expectations, the Washington Commanders unlocked their championship window in 2024 by trading for San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Debo Samuel. They're pushing that bad boy wide open. I'm David Harrison of Locked On Commanders. And I can confirm on Saturday night that the Washington Commanders are trading for San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Debo Samuel. Right now reported at a 5th-round pick, and that the Commanders are taking all of that money. And this is one of the full shift moments. The Washington Commanders franchise has been turning around ever since Josh Harris became the managing partner of that new ownership group here for the franchise. But then with the hiring of Adam Peters to be the general manager, head coach Dan Quinn to be the leader of this team and help institute this new culture that he says the players set forth. They're doing things the right way. And Deebo Samuel is someone that general manager Adam Peters knows very well from their shared time in San Francisco. They believe he is a commander. And guys like Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, et cetera, are going to make sure that he comes in. And if he's not already, is going to be a part of the standard that they set in 2024, will continue to grow in 2025 as they continue to try to chase down the Philadelphia Eagles and win their franchise's 4th Super Bowl trophy. For more on this trade and everything that comes with it, check out the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right geographical area, wrong team. I thought he'd be 35 minutes down the road in Baltimore. I thought it was a match made in heaven. I looked at it as another Anquan Bolden move. But the more I think about him in Washington, I think about the way Washington played against the Eagles in the playoffs. And I think about the drop balls. I think about Austin Eckler fumbling the ball. I think about De'Ami Brown fumbling the ball in Eagles territory. And I think about Debo Samuel, who's dominated the Eagles. This ain't about separation and route running. This is about just having a pure football player on that field that won't make those mistakes in critical moments.
Yeah, I mean, big move for Washington. I'm sure a lot of teams around the league are looking around, at least fans are looking at their team being like, we couldn't give another 5th-round pick for Debo Samuel. Like that's what fans do in this situation. And it is surprising just how little certain players actually will end up costing when they're available. Because we always think that, someone like Deebo Samuel, that should cost you, a 2nd-round pick, maybe like a 1st-round pick. No, that's not the vast majority of players in this league. And especially when you look at the position value, like receivers, I don't like the receiver draft class we got coming up, but you can get a receiver every single year via the draft where you don't need to be out there giving up a ton to go get someone like Debo Samuel, who is a weapon. Certainly it can be utilized in a lot of different facets, as we saw what Kyle Shanahan did. And I'm expecting that Cliff Kingsbury will do that up in Washington. I will say pump the brakes, David, when it comes to Super Bowl window. My God, man. I mean, they had a fun year. And they made it to the NFC title game, and we saw just how far they are from actually being a Super Bowl contender. So, fun times in Washington. Don't want to ruin that for anybody out there. Just let's slow it down. That defense needs to improve dramatically. Jonathan Allen looks like he's about to depart from Washington. They didn't really get a ton out of Johnny Newton, who will be his replacement moving forward as a rookie at Illinois this past season. I like the vibes of Washington. I think this is a great move for their quarterback and just this organization especially. But, I mean, Dallas is going to be back next year. So I don't think that they're quite there yet. But obviously encouraging, and this just adds to all the hype surrounding this team from this past season.
And I love you make some great points, and I love looking at guys in tandem, and I look at what they're made of, right? So I like Scary Terry. It seems like at some point he got a little bit of the same DNA put in his gumbo pot that Debo Samuel did, and I love complementary type football players, tough, professional. And if the team can adopt to that, they got Brian Robinson, the running back, same way. Dude got shot, and about 3 weeks later, he's out there running for touchdowns. You know what I'm saying? So if the personality is also injected into the team, I believe this pick will make it look even better. All right, The next thing, the 49ers, the team giving up on Deebo, not just Debo Samuel. They're talking about a year after giving Brandon Ayuk a huge extension and him getting hurt, that they're trying to purge the entire receiving core. Trent Williams may not even be back as a veteran. And Christian McCaffrey, he's not the healthiest quarterback, but they do have a young quarterback that is on a rookie deal that they're going to have to make a decision whether or not they pay him. And the guys from Locked On 49ers had this to say about that.
And do you going into a rebuild that same year paying your quarterback top dollar at the quarterback position?
If you for sure pay your quarterback and then go that direction, if you think that, because look, if you want to have a long lasting winning franchise and football team, if you have the marriage of like the real deal head coach and the real deal quarterback, and Kyle Shanahan called Brock Purdy the real deal, you can win for a long time, and the rest of the roster can change. And we saw it in New England where every single all other 52 guys on the roster were swapped out, and they won Super Bowls with both groups, right? And so if Brock Purdy is that, you pay him, you don't look back, you got Kyle Shanahan, and you put together a different group that ends up going to a Super Bowl later, right?
This leads me to ask this question. Because those guys also said, Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker, they make some great valid points always. They said the other day that the 49ers ought to even let Brock Purdy test his value a little bit and see what they could get, what he thinks he could get before they decide whether or not they're going to keep him or not. Where do you think they're headed? Because Brock Purdy is considered according to Cam Newton, a game manager. We can argue that point back and forth. But when you start reducing those weapons around him, don't you think that could expose him for what he is and what he isn't?
Yeah, well, Cam is talking about Brock Purdy. We're talking about Brock Purdy. He's never said Brock's last name correctly, which I always laugh at. Yeah, I found that very interesting. They were giving the New England example of Brady and Belichick. I do think they have like the real deal head coach. Now, Kyle Shanahan, multiple times in a Super Bowl now, has left a lot to be desired as a play caller, and his team losing all those games. And, one of them very famously too, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and the New England Patriots down there in Houston a couple of years ago. Like, in Tom Brady, come on, man, 7 rings, the GOAT. Like, Brock, I don't want to hear Brock Purdy and Tom Brady's names mentioned in the same light at all right now. I understand the point that they're trying to make, that if you have that head coach, you have that quarterback, you're in a great situation. I think they have the head coach. I don't know. Like, there's still some questions there, because, like, if Jordan Love didn't do the tribute to Brett Favre and throw that pick in that game a year ago, are we sitting here feeling the same way about Brock Purdy? Because they lose that game to Green Bay. It's a game where the elements were not great, and he has the small hands, and that's the kind of stuff I roll my eyes out. A lot of people roll their eyes out this time of the year when the combine's going on, but that is something that does matter. He does not have the overwhelming physical traits, and of course, he was selected last in the draft a couple of years ago for a reason, but he's been remarkable. When you have George Kittle, when you have Debo Samuel, you have Brandon Ayuk, you have Trent Williams, best left tackle in the NFL and the best play caller in the NFL, and Kyle Shanahan, things are made a lot easier for you. And it is a team game. Everyone has to understand that. Like, are San Francisco 49ers winning games because of Brock Purdy, or are they winning them with Brock Purdy? I think mainly they're winning with Brock Purdy. And if that is the case, then you can make the argument that it would make sense for them to let him test the market and maybe go get somebody cheaper. And I have seen the argument to go get Sam Darnold. I think that's kind of wild, because while Sam may have the physical tools and all that, when push comes to shove, he will let you down. Ask anybody, and especially the Minnesota Vikings this past year, but he would be a cheaper option. And I'm pretty confident he just won 14 games with the Vikings. You don't think he can win 14 games with the 49ers? They're not going to win the playoffs in that division. Like, he can win plenty of games in a regular season with San Francisco in that setup. I don't know if he can do it when it matters most, which is what they're looking for. So that's certainly an interesting conversation to have. I don't think Brock Purdy is worth the money they're going to give him. That's just the market that quarterbacks are getting now. And I feel the same way for most quarterbacks in this league. But we'll see what they do. But that is certainly a very interesting topic conversation coming up here over the next week or so for San Francisco.
I'll tell you something. I'll give you my synopsis of their coach, the 49ers coach, Shanahan, when he gets deep into the playoffs. All of these coaches, going back to Bill Parcells and even the coaches now that are getting jobs, say it's players over plays, right? I think his plays get them to that point. The reason why I say that is because every single time when it has to be players in the Super Bowl, he's had, well, other than Matt Ryan, he's had Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy. He had to depend on himself. He can't depend on those guys and lean on those guys. You remember the Rams were losing the Super Bowl and they went Matthew Stafford to Cooper Kupp like every play on that last drive. Everybody, you knew it was coming. Hey, we ain't hiding it. You know who's going to get the ball. The Chiefs, whenever they were in trouble, they went Mahomes to either Tyreek Hill back in the day or Travis Kelce. You know he's getting the ball. Kelce scored a game-winning touchdown just against the 49ers. You always depend on your great players. I think what he does, he depends on plays and not players, because Christian McCaffrey and Debo Samuel, in my opinion, and George Kittle should have been the only 3 guys touched that ball in the fourth quarter against the Chiefs. You have to rely on those guys, but when you don't, you see what usually happens. So, that being said, now it's combine time. Everybody's talking about combine. Everybody thinks all these teams are going to win. But a few years back, or a couple of years ago, the Bears gave away a plethora. Well, they gave away the number 1 pick for a plethora of draft choices. How did that turn out? You ain't gonna believe this when I tell you. The Bears got a new coach. The coach they had when they did that, they got fired. Julian Council told me something that made my jaw drop, and I'm gonna let him tell y'all that in just a second here on Locked On NFL. All right, rolling along here on Locked On NFL. Combine week just ended. Everybody's going to pick an all-star, or everybody's going to pick an all-pro or a pro bowler in the first 2 rounds. That's the way everybody thinks about this. And history doesn't teach us, if you go back and look, that most of the guys that are picked, they stink, right? And a lot of guys that are picked later, they're very good. But fans think they got it all right. And, after the combine, everybody's fired up about the list and where we're going to get guys on the list. couple of years ago, the Bears felt like they were the big winners in a trade with the Carolina Panthers, Julian's Carolina Panthers. The Bears are still looking to get over the hump with a new coach, a new regime, a new quarterback. You believe it or not, the Panthers aren't that far behind them. But I'm going to let Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears tell you exactly what the Bears are looking to add this year to see if they can push over the hump. And then I'll come back and let Julian and Council explain to you that this big gap that everybody thought is a little bit smaller than you think.
The Chicago Bears will be getting a new starting defensive end opposite Montez Sweat, and Ryan Poles will have plenty of salary cap space to do it. I'm Lauren Cox, host of the Locked On Bears podcast, and the team officially released defensive end DeMarcus Walker and tight end Gerald Everett as salary cap casualties. They cleared up some extra room to give them almost $80 million in salary cap space, which is good because they're going to need to spend some of that to get a new starter opposite Montez Sweat. Clearly, defensive coordinator Dennis Allen decided Walker wasn't going to cut it for his defense, and they're going to go out and need somebody better to be that bookend pass rusher, whether it's a former Saint like Chase Young or somebody in the first round like James Pierce or Mike Green. The Bears are going to have to upgrade their pass rush, and they're telling everyone this is going to be a priority. We'll break down all of the Bears' free agent signings and NFL draft picks all offseason long on the Locked On Bears podcast. Find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
So I'm thinking they have a really good chance to have a bookend edge rushers that sounds like a law firm. How about the law offices of Sweat and Sweat? Josh Sweat to go along with Montez Sweat would ring a big bell for him, but I think they're further away, and that's surprising considering the haul that everyone bragged about them getting from your Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, and the Chase Young situation, that would be a terrible signing because he didn't do anything for New Orleans. I know he was one of those big-name guys that was still available later on in free agency last year. He ended up signing down in New Orleans. I know he was going to visit in Carolina as well. I mean, Panthers, not like they made out that well with Jadeveon Clowney either way. But yeah, I mean, Chicago, I saw the signs when they played the Panthers this past year, and that was a game where the Bears, they won convincingly, and Andy Dalton was starting as Bryce Young was benched, and you looked and saw that Caleb Williams, who ended up being the number one overall pick this past year, which Carolina gave away when they traded for the number one overall pick to get Bryce Young, and they had that 2-15 season. Caleb Williams is out there, Darnell Wright was out there, Tyreek Stevenson was out on the field, and some other players that were involved because of that trade that Carolina made with Chicago, and you know, Bears fans are like, thank you, Carolina. Well, you look at the end of the year, they're both 5-12. And you look at things right now, while the Bears may have $80 million in cap space, like the best way to build a team is via the draft. And when you talk about Chase Young as your edge rusher, like you need to be focused on some of your draft guys, which would suggest that you're probably not that close. And sitting in the division that they're in right now, I mean, Green Bay ain't getting worse. The Vikings, we'll see what J.J. McCarthy or Sam Darnold, whatever they figure they're going to do, they're probably going to be just fine as well. So in Detroit, maybe a step back there. But the Bears are still going to be perceived as the worst team in the division. And it's great to have Ben Johnson there working with Caleb Williams this season. But still, there's a lot of questions. You look at Carolina, for another 5-12 team, there's a decent amount of optimism based off of how Bryce Young played in the season and the fact that, yes, they got to overhaul the defense, figure that all out, but they feel pretty good about where their quarterback is headed moving forward. And these teams aren't that far apart. When you've looked at in the past, when teams have given up a ton to get a player like Cleveland to go out there and get Deshaun Watson, the Browns stink. Well, the Texans have gone to the playoffs the last 2 years. You look at the Seahawks and the Broncos situation, like the Seahawks were better than the Broncos once the Broncos got Russell Wilson. Now it looks like Denver has gotten back to where they're different conferences and all that, same record, and they got in this past year where Seattle won 10 games, didn't, but those teams aren't really necessarily that far apart. Typically, the team that gives up a ton of picks ends up being far worse than the team that gets those picks, and so far, Chicago hasn't necessarily capitalized on that, and only time will tell, as you know, that's kind of the point here. Only time will tell who necessarily won that trade, but I cannot say right now definitively that Carolina lost that or Chicago won it. Right now, it's kind of a draw, and maybe even leaning towards Carolina's side of things, just based off of how things are going so far.
I think the only thing that leans towards the Bears is if you had to pick one job right now, me personally, I would want the Carolina job. I just wouldn't want to have anything to do with Dave Tepper. But
that's the problem.
Yeah. But still, 2 years out, this is why I tell people, stop watching the draft thinking that your team is building a fantasy team and that they're sitting there drafting guys for the following season. They don't do that when they go out and procure talent in the draft. They go out and get talent in the draft because they want that in the building for a long-term run. And right now, I think if you ask most people who won the deal because of the way that Bryce Young has played, and I don't think Caleb Williams has been as bad as people believe he has.
No.
I really and truly believe that people are now looking at that a little bit differently, and the gap is closing. And that is a case study on why you don't judge draft picks and you don't judge trades based on a small sample size. You don't get a small sample size here on Locked On NFL. You get the whole meal, man, and we give it to you twice a day. So I hope you're hungry. Tyler rolling in the morning will hit you upside your head like a double shot of espresso, and then you slide through here in the barbershop where all we do is sit here and find reasons to tell people why they're wrong about what they're doing, because that's what happens in the barbershop on every single visit. You guys take care of yourself. We appreciate you joining us. Take care of each other. It's draft season, man, so we'll have a lot of that stuff, a lot of combine notes, all of that and more covered on both Locked On NFL PM and AM here on Locked On NFL. Take care. We'll see you next week.